Kevin from Storytellers Union here, getting ready to kick off my top 30 albums of 2021 list. Video edition this year. So tonight we're going to conquer albums number 30 through 26. So let's start with album number 30. My number 30 album of 2021 is Sturgill Simpson and the Ballad of Dude and Juanita. This is a kind of an unusual album, and I don't know if there is a usual Sturgill Simpson album. It's obvious at this point that the Kentucky native just does what he wants, and it's one of the reasons I love him. I know the last time he did a full-length album of originals, it was the leather jacket, big amps, guitars, rock and roll. It was not to everyone's liking. I thought there was some really good stuff on there myself, and he wasn't just trolling. In my opinion, I thought that seemed pretty committed to it, and there's some great songs there. But he did a hard reset last year. He did the Cutting Grass Volumes 1 and 2, where he took a lot of his old material through various albums and recast them as bluegrass songs. So you couldn't do a bigger 180 than what he did on those albums. And some of those arrangements are just revelatory. They actually kind of rival, in my opinion, some of the originals. And he must have really, I think that's obviously the music of his roots, his background, and he really connected with what he had going on there. So he decided to expand that into a full-length album of originals using the same backing players, those master players that he had for those Cutting Grass records, and putting them on in service of new songs. If anything, it's a very brief album. In some ways is almost more like an EP. It goes by at the speed of sound, and I do think that more so than any individual songs, they work as a collective because it is a story. He's actually doing a concept album, which is a very old school thing to do. But it's a concept album set here in the great state of Kentucky back a couple 100 years ago, and it's entertaining from beginning to end. Especially if you like if you thought that he was going too far in one direction, maybe this is the correction that you were looking for in him stripping everything back down to these great bluegrass numbers. So number 30, Sturgill Simpson. Talk about doing 180s. Number 29 is a 180 from number 30, and that is Iron Maiden, and I'm going to probably flub the pronunciation of this album, but it's Senjutsu, I think is the way that they pronounce it. Either way, this is the metal legends, the British metal legends that have been doing it since 1975, believe it or not. Still out there doing original material, not just relying on nostalgia and the hits. You're not going to find a Run to the Hills on here, but it's just ridiculous how through all these many years, how consistent Iron Maiden can be, and just how undiminished by time. I don't know what's going on with Bruce Dickinson and his voice. Everyone loses some range, and in fairness, maybe there's some noticeable there, but it is still such a powerful, big, strong voice, despite the wear and tear that he's put on it over the years. And this set of songs is fantastic. It's ambitious. It is a double album, which is not really in vogue. Double albums typically have tended more towards failure than success, and especially in this day and age with such short attention spans, I love the fact that they just doubled down on no, this is who we are, this is what we like, and so the songs are as long as ever. In fact, in some ways, the songs are longer than ever, many stretching over 10 minutes a piece, and then doing so for hour plus, whatever the length of this double album is. But if you want a good atmospheric hard rock record in an old school style, Iron Maiden has produced a great one for you, and that's my number 29. Number 28, sticking in the rock and roll vein, Ty Segall. It seems like every 4 months he puts out a new record or has a project that puts out a new record. And so, if anything, Ty is easy to overlook because there's just so much of him that it takes, honestly, some effort to keep up with it and to wade through what is on the better side. He very rarely, though, missteps, even as he sort of skips around through different styles of rock and roll. It has primarily always been hard rock, heavy metal, pop rock, something very guitar based. for Ty. And my number 28 album is Ty's Harmonizer, and that it's a little different than what I was just describing with many of his works, in that he kind of, the guitar sort of plays second fiddle, and that's actually not to the music's detriment. If anything, for those who maybe have not been able to get into Ty before, it is by far his most accessible album, in my opinion. The melodies stick out more because the noise is sort of tuned down some. Synthesizers, other things sort of bubble up to the forefront. The guitars are still there, so don't worry, this still rocks big time, but in a very different way. The vocals are much clearer and recorded in not quite as raw a fashion, and so by and large, it makes it the most accessible album of Ty Segall's career, and my number 28 album of 2021. Moving on to soul music. For number 27, and it's Duran Jones and the Indications. You probably have loved them for their retro, sort of retro soul style that they put out there, playing soul music in a way that it is really not presented much any longer. And they've sort of tweaked that formula a little bit with Private Spaces, and it's made for one of their more interesting albums. I've always liked them. They've always been fun live, but I think this is a more complete album because of some of the variety they added on it. Not saying it's still not retro. Let's just say that they maybe move things up from the 60s to the 70s, and maybe a little more 70s R&B, as well as some disco influences, some dance influences in there. Duran Jones has a powerful soul voice, but occasionally, if you're familiar with any of their past work, occasionally their drummer steps up to the microphone and sings one or two songs, usually an album. And he has an amazing falsetto that I think that they realized is really popular with their fans, and they gave him more room to stretch out this time. So even though it's still Duran Jones and the Indications, there's more sharing of those vocal duties, and I think that also adds to the variety on this album. And I will end tonight's installment of our Best of 2021 list by going to the blues. And that is Cedric Burnside and I Be Trying. A lot of times, if you're a really strict traditionalist, you kind of bound an artist to do a certain thing repeatedly, and that is sort of mimic the masters. And sometimes that has some diminishing returns. For me, I have a hard time sort of getting into modern blues. I love a lot of the old school blues and the blues masters, your Buddy Guy, Muddy Waters, Howling Wolf, those guys. And the modern blues, I have things that I like, but I find that you either fall into two camps. You are a modern blues artist doing it in a way that, to me, isn't blues. It's something completely different, maybe based in blues, but it's not the kind of blues that I like. However, if you're just note for note copying what had been done previously, as well as the look, the aesthetic, which often happens too because you get pigeonholed. Sometimes that has diminishing returns too, and it just seems like, well, if I'm going to listen to this, I might as well listen to the real thing and not a copy. Cedric Burnside manages to do the tricky feat here of taking a traditional style and bringing it into a modern era without alienating what made the original so great to begin with. And that's harder than it sounds. And so there's a lot of fire, and again, hill country blues, and as well as amplified blues. It's about modern topics. It's about his life. It feels lived in and feels real, and is definitely one of the better records of 2021. Definitely one of the better blues records I've heard in some time. So, maybe Keb Mo, Taj Mahal, those are some maybe more modern influences, even though I know those guys aren't young anymore. But if you're wanting to maybe have something as a way of comparison, but if you're a fan of the blues, definitely check out I Be Trying. Actually, check out any of the five albums I just talked about. So we've gone from bluegrass to blues to soul to metal to rock and roll. So that's the kind of variety you're going to get from me. That's how schizophrenic my listening tastes tend to be. And you're going to get more of that as we count all the way down to number one. But we'll do that again in our next video when we start with number 25 and head up to 21. And we'll see you then. Appreciate you tuning in.